Good morning and welcome to the May 2023 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or the MHRA, as we prefer to call ourselves. My name is Stephen Lightfoot. I'm the chair of the board, and my role today is to lead us through the agenda. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I must start by reminding you that this is a board meeting held in public, and it is not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that this board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, maintaining high standards of corporate governance, and also scrutinising the performance of the MHRA. But it's equally important to say that this board does not make any regulatory decisions on any individual medicines or medical devices. And that's because the regulatory decisions themselves are made by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care, on the recommendations of the MHRA officials, who themselves are independent civil servants, with the additional independent advice from our expert advisory committees, such as the Commission on Human Medicines. Now, as far as today's meeting is concerned, I also need to make you aware that we'll be recording the meeting, so we can publish the video on our website to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible to observe what the board does. And I think on that note, I'm particularly pleased to say that 79 people have registered to observe our meeting live, with 45 members of the public or representatives of patient groups attending, along with 19 representatives from industry, 4 people from media outlets, and 11 members of staff. So welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Now, with introductions in mind, I'd just like to go around the room and ask my colleagues to introduce themselves so that everyone who's watching can actually know exactly who's in the room today. So as I said, my name's Stephen Lightfoot, and I'm the chair of the board. June.
Good morning, I'm June Rain and I'm the CEO at the MHRA.
I'm Natalie Richards, I'm the head of the executive office at the MHRA.
Morning, I'm Graham Cook, I'm a non-executive director.
Good morning, I'm Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer.
Good morning, Mercy Jersingham, non-executive director.
Morning, Mandy Calvert, non-exec director.
Good morning, Glenn Wells, Chief Partnerships Officer.
Good morning, Haider Hussain, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, I'm the Chief Digital and Technology Officer and my name's Claire Harrison.
Good morning, Catherine Glover, Deputy Director for Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Good morning, Mark Bailey, Chief Science and Innovation Officer.
Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Morning, I'm Laura Squire, Chief Healthcare Quality and Access Officer.
Good morning, Junaid Bajwa, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer.
Good morning, Michael Whitehouse, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Bosworth, I'm Director of Communications and Engagement.
Good morning, Carly McGorry, Director of Governance, MHRA.
Great, thank you, colleagues. So you should all have access to our board pack of papers for today's meeting, and I'll use the page numbers in the board pack to keep us all on track. Now, we've got some really important papers today. We're going to be talking through the closure of our delivery plan, having completed the majority of the actions. We want to talk about our current performance, which is clearly very relevant, and also, in particular, our new compliance strategy and then our new corporate plan. So although this is not a public meeting, we will provide the opportunity for members of the public to ask specific questions about items on today's agenda. And that can be done by using the chat function on Zoom. But I think it's also important just to make the members of the public aware that the board cannot see any of the chat in this room here today. So any of the chat function will only be seen by the communications team. And our Director of Communications, Rachel Bosworth, will collate the questions that are relevant to today's meeting, and we'll cover those at the end of the session. If you do want to ask a question that's not on the board agenda today about any other of the MHRA's activities, then please contact our Customer Experience Centre directly instead, and you'll get a quicker response that way. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, but can I just check with colleagues that that's clear, and if there are any questions? I'm seeing nods around the table. That's great. Okay, that being the case, then let's move on into the agenda itself. The first item, obviously, about apologies. We do have apologies from Raj Long, our non-executive, one of our non-executive directors. Also from Alison Strath, Chief Pharmaceutical Officer in Scotland. Greg Chalmers, the head of the Chief Medical Officer's Policy Division in Scotland, and Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer in Northern Ireland. So again, Natalie, if we could just record those apologies, please, that will be helpful. If we move then just on to the next item, which would be number 2, about declarations of interest, and that's on page number 3 of the pack. Can I just check with some board members if there are any new declarations that are not already noted in the pack? I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands. So, okay, so there are no more new declarations to add to the register. Having reviewed the board pack itself, I'm not of a view that there's any conflicts of interest that we'd need to ask a member of the board to actually leave the room for any of the items. So I'm suggesting that there are no mitigating actions required. Can I just check that the board is content with that? Again, I'm seeing nods around the table. That's great. Thank you very much. So if we move on then to the minutes of the last meeting on page number 7, can first of all I just check that the draft minutes that are in the board pack are an accurate record of the last meeting? Again, I'm seeing nods around the table. So on that basis, then please, Natalie, if we can just approve the minutes as written as an accurate record of the meeting on the 21st of March. That leads us on quite nicely into page number 12, which is the actions from the last meeting. And there's a number of actions here that have been completed. So they are actions number 59, 62, 79, 80, 90 and 95, and they're all proposed for closure. Can I just check the board's content with that? So on that basis, again, please, Natalie, if we can just record those actions as completed and they can come off the action list for the next meeting. Action 88 is on the agenda, but there's 4 different verbal updates, which I'd just like to pick up on. And so the first is on action number 71, around the regulatory framework for artificial intelligence as a medical device. Laura, what's the latest on that?
Thank you, Stephen. This goes back to the plan we published in October 22, the software and AI roadmap. That was 33 actions to provide a regulatory framework which protects patients but also makes the UK a home for responsible innovation. Some of those actions were dependent on regulations, others a significant element of it is guidance. Right. And we are publishing the guidance in a stepwise manner along with the development of the broader device regulation. We've already published 2 pieces of guidance for manufacturers of software and AI medical devices. That's creating an intended use statement and good machine learning practice for medical device development, which we did with Health Canada and FDA. Our next step is publishing specific guidance on post-market reporting requirements, and we are also preparing to publish guidance on predetermined change control plans. On the legislation, the latest position is we've published the SI for transition last month, and that's going through Parliament now, and if that is successful, that will take the standstill to summer 2025. The next step on the SIs is the post-market surveillance, post-market safety monitoring SI. We are also impacting the findings of the advisory group, which was set up by the Life Sciences Council to ensure that we're making the most of the opportunity to create a new regulatory framework. On software specifically, we are in the process of appointing a new head of software, and he or she will be looking at the timetable for delivery. And I think what we may be doing is readjusting some of the elements to make sure that we are delivering the things that are not, we're not holding things up because of the regulation, so we're getting stuff out. Clearly, AI is a ripe area for innovation, so improving access to AI is a priority, and some of that doesn't require legislation. So working very closely with Mark on that and thinking about the innovation funding. So quite a lot going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful summary actually of all the activities that are ongoing, and I think you're right about the importance of having guidance and also where you need the legislation. We need both, you know, and I think there's a whole stream of activity. So if colleagues are content, I'm proposing that we actually close that action because the work is so far advanced now and is ongoing that we don't need to keep coming back to the board specifically on that action, I think. So I think we'll close that one, but thank you for all the work that's going on there, Laura. That's very helpful. The next action that we asked for a verbal update was 93, was just the submission of the MHRA budget to the Department of Health and Social Care. Rose?
Yes, that has been completed.
So that again can be closed then. Thank you. Action number 94. Mark, the action there was about health and safety reports onto quarterly performance report to the board, and we'll see that very shortly.
We absolutely will. So the report itself has been discussed. There's a final set of amendments made, and it should be going onto the website very shortly. More importantly, of course, we've discussed at the board about an ongoing review rather than waiting for an annual review. Yeah. And that's work that's going to be taken by the Assurance and Risk Committee, ARAC, yeah. With regular board reporting. And we also have scheduled a overall health and safety strategy as a board item later on in the year. And that should then bring the KPIs mentioned, the key performance indicators will be reviewed at ARAC, yeah. And made sure they're regularly reported on.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, Mark, and that's going way above what the initial action was, and I think that's exactly right. So again, if everyone's content, I suggest that we can close that action as work that is now sort of ongoing. Okay. And then the final point on here was just 96. And this was just around our terms of reference, and Carly, I think they've been updated, but anything else you'd like to add?
No, I can confirm that the terms of reference have been updated as per our last discussion, and the ones for the executive committee will be approved in a batch of items there.
Good. Okay, so if everyone else is content, I'll close that item as well. So great. Well, thank you very much for working your way through that. Again, I think it's good to see that we're actually really completing the actions that we set out to achieve. So thank you very much for that. So that takes us very nicely onto the first substantive item. And this is an important item around our delivery plan, because 2 years ago, we established a delivery plan for 2021 to 23, putting patients first, a new era for our agency. And so I think the core question behind this particular paper on page number 14 is how well has the MHRA achieved those deliverables over that 2-year plan? So Rose, as the senior responsible officer for this particular task, do you want to just give some initial comments to the board? You can assume we've read the report, but any particular points you'd like to highlight before we start into a discussion?
Thank you, Stephen. The delivery plan published in July 2021 set out quite an ambitious series of deliverables during a period of intense internal and external change. We've achieved 59% of what we planned by the end of March, and by the end of June, this will rise to 70%. The remaining actions, which are mostly part of complex long-term projects, have been fed into the business plan process, which sets out what we need to do to accomplish the new 3-year corporate plan, which we'll talk about later. And so they are being carried forward to make sure that they're still appropriate.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And again, thank you for just including all the detail of all the different actions that were identified. Certainly 2 years ago, I remember well, we were very concerned about were we taking on too much? But I think actually a lot has been achieved. So, colleagues, are there any specific questions? This is an important item for assurance, because obviously we'd like to be in a position to close this, but only if we think the work's been done. But Michael, do you want to kick us off?
I would agree a lot has been achieved, but deliverables are a means to an end. Ultimately, it's the outcome. And I suppose the two questions I would have is, we've delivered a lot, great. What does that say, though, about our current resilience as an organisation? And this may be something that June may want to comment on. And secondly, this plan was over a period when we had to respond to COVID, and I think we did some brilliant things. But there is a lot of interest out there about, are we prepared for the future? So have these projects put us in a position that we are a more resilient organisation than we were 2 years ago?
Okay. Rose, do you want to start with that? I might come to June for any additional comments. Could you put the microphone, please, Rose? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think obviously one of the key things that we delivered was a restructuring of the organisation, with the intention that that would allow us to approach our work in a different way and make us more resilient. I think that is taking time to bed in. such a key structural change will always take time to bed in, but it does give us that structure for the future that is intended to give us that resilience. Yes, certainly.
Okay. June, any other observations from your perspective?
Yes, our executive team is very alert to these questions. And while it's difficult to put a finger on how you operationalize a new organization and start to see ownership of actions, that is definitely happening. And some of the things we might talk about during this meeting will show that kind of responsiveness and resilience coming through. In terms of preparedness for the future, I hope that the corporate plan will actually be that framework now. But in summary, it's something very much at the forefront as we take stock at the executive of the agency's not just responsiveness to safety, but opportunities which arise. And again, we'll talk about some of those. So very much part of the executive's role.
Okay. And I think an important part of that, Michael, as well, is that the corporate plan needs to be a continuation of what we're doing, not just going off in a completely different direction. So it's building on what's been achieved. And I think that's what gives me confidence of the future resilience. But we can't be complacent about it, I think is the point. Hader, I think you had a question, and then I'll come to Junaid in a moment.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the report. The agency has certainly achieved much over the last 2 years that it should be proud of, especially given the challenges faced. My question relates to the items that had their timescales extended. For example, RMS and the AI regulation work that I think we've already had a good update on. What further assurance can be provided that will enable that we will be able to deliver in a timely manner and not continue to encounter delays due to ongoing and increasing complexity of these items?
Is that a general point, or was it specifically around the regulatory management system?
I think we've heard about AI, so it's more about RMS, to be honest.
Okay, so Rose, do you want to say anything first? And I'll maybe come to Laura as the Senior Responsible Officer for the regulatory management system.
Laura probably knows a lot more about that than I do. So if I could pass it over to Laura,
okay,
that'd be great.
Laura. Yeah, will you just use your microphone, please? Sorry.
On RMS, we have a strong project team, we have a strong project board, and we are also working very closely with Strategic Change Committee in the agency to really kick the tires on what is a very challenging plan. And I think that work is continuing. We have found as we're going through the stages of development, it is very, very complex. And I think we will have to think about how we are going to make sure that we are not, and we are thinking about ways of working within the project as well, because we have an enormously complex organisation, which perhaps in hindsight, you might have wanted to simplify that before you started to build, but we are where we are with that. So, I mean, I think the assurance is the frameworks that we've built around RMS. And we are keeping everything under very tight review. And we've got a new program director who's just started this week, who will help even more with that. But with an agile project, you don't know what your scope is at the start. You don't know what the complexity is at the start. So it does evolve. And I think we have to, with that is something that is the nature of agile projects. So there are decisions there to be made about I think, reviewing things now and making sure that what we have as our current delivery dates, we're clear about what will be in that scope. Claire might want to come in as well.
Yeah. Claire, why don't you carry on? I'll come back to Hader.
Yeah, just to add to that and some of the practicalities. So the work in my team, my portfolio of different projects and work streams and so on, I've paused some of those, deprioritised some to make sure everyone who can be is focused on RMS. So just moving some of our technical people over and that kind of thing. Laura talked about agile, and so we're not slavishly following it just for the sake of it. There are pros and cons, but some of the big advantages are our users get to see the thing first and test it, and we can iterate through any issues and so on, rather than waiting for a couple of years before it's developed and then everyone sees it for the first time. So the point that Laura made about scope, some people aren't keen on maybe a lack of sort of confidence and perceived lack of planning. There is a lot of planning. We just work really closely with our users and other stakeholders on that.
So it sounds like the scope's evolving. It certainly sounds like we're getting the resources in place. But Hayley, just coming back to you as you asked the question, thinking of your day job outside of the agency, any other advice you can give in terms of actually how you keep major programs of IT activity like this on track?
I mean, I completely understand and hear what Laura is saying about the ongoing evolving complexity, which is why I kind of asked the question. I think it's great that we're involving end users at all stages and giving them a heads up, because that's going to be critical to adoption and ongoing use. It would be good to perhaps have a deep dive of this at another session, soon.
Well, I think we did have a joint committee meeting, didn't we, between the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee and also the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee as two committees. And maybe that will be a place to do another deep dive, perhaps.
I think when we had the last hour, we agreed, I think, that we would have some sort of meeting in the summer with Laura and other non-executives. Very happy to be involved in that.
Yeah, okay. So, Claire, you want to come back?
Yeah, the only other thing to add is with comparable organisations and comparable projects, the subject matter and the technology involved and so on, it takes several years. And so, yes, it's complicated and, thinking about time, budget, scope, but we're still delivering at pace with the progress.
But you're also doing it in phases, so there'll be a minimum viable product. So when you're expecting to get that first phase produced, because that would, I think, if we had a date in our minds, that would help give the board assurance. I think.
So that's towards the end of this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then drops constantly after that, and always having a product team with the product, so to keep it fresh. So we don't have to keep finding another budget, starting a project, then stopping it to make those changes. So it will be.
It shouldn't surprise us. It's taken 20 years to develop the current Sentinel, in truth. So the next version will take another 10 to 20 years as well. But I think the important point is that the first phase will be launched in this calendar year.
Yeah, but we're always open about the difficulties and challenges and lean on whether it's ExCo members, board members. So I think we'll continue to do that. It's a principle that Laura and I share.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I think if we can just record in the minutes, actually, Michael's suggestion there from the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee deep dive is open to other non-executive members as well. So, okay. Junaid, and then I'll come to Mandy and Graham.
Thank you. I just wanted to commend and thank the agency and its members, the exec and your team members for everything that they've done on the delivery plan. I think it's been an extraordinary piece of work. And on the impact side, especially on safety, it makes me realize that during the pandemic, we had incredible ecosystem collaboration happening. And actually, we need that ecosystem collaboration to continue if we're going to have our impact. So we will absolutely put patients first in the agency, but we need others across the patient ecosystem, as it were, to also do their part. And I just wondered, if we reflect on this and think about our even better if moving forward, is there more that we can do with other bodies such as NICE and NHS England and others to ultimately deliver the impact that we wish to have moving forward too?
So anybody want to follow that up? Yeah, Glenn.
Thanks. In terms of system alignment, so it's in the CEO report, but it's worth pointing out that my group has pulled together a meeting of all UK health bodies, NICE and all HTA agencies. They meet every quarter, 4 working groups and a steering group to make sure that we do in fact talk to each other. Also enhance information sharing through a consent-based process. So I completely agree with you. We can't do what we do and safeguard public health as we set out to do without that partnership and collaboration, which is early days. It's something we set up relatively recently, the last few months, but everyone's buying in so far. We've got good conversations ongoing and plans to work together more closely.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. June, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's a founding principle of our organisation. We've never had a partnerships group before, but now we're moving from discussions to meaningful outcomes. And I'm fully expecting that there will be measurable outcomes in areas like the innovation pathway that will test as to whether these partnerships are actually working in practice. So very much of just now, the framework is there, as Glenn says, but it's what we deliver through that framework and its public health impact that proves the assumption that you have a better impact together.
Yeah, we can't do this on our own. I think it's a very, very well made point. Okay, Mandy.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I would reflect considerable progress being made over the last 3 years. One of my questions was about the learning for the agency and what we could do better in the future. We've touched on the collaboration. Are there any other areas which are key changes and learning for the agency that we take forward in the future? And the other question is, how do we think we stack up against other regulatory agencies around the world, having made this progress over the last 3 years?
Okay. Rose, what's been the process in terms of learnings from this to actually build into the corporate plan?
So we have very much taken on the learning in terms of what we can achieve. So timeframes, setting reasonable timeframes. I think when we move to the corporate plan, there is something around making sure we're kicking things off in the right way so that we don't, we have the right timeframes for delivering. So that's, I think, one of the key lessons learned from this phase of the development, the delivery plan.
What about communications internally? Because I think that's also probably, it took us quite a long time, I think, for our staff in the agency to understand what we were trying to achieve.
Yes, throughout the development of the new corporate plan and the business plan, we are very much involving both internal stakeholders, so our staff, but also external stakeholders in a far bigger way. They have helped shape the new corporate plan in a different way than we did, I think, the delivery plan. And with staff, we've got a very strong plan about how we're going to, well, we started the communication in that they've been involved in its creation, but then going to them with a finished product, there's a very clear plan on how we intend to do that.
So that feels quite different actually to the way the delivery plan was put together, was my observation. So that's great. And June, just the second half of Mandy's question around how we compare with international regulators.
Well, if I might just pick up a point about lessons, and yes, there are many lessons. And I think actually governance and how it works and the ability to take rapid decisions and maybe some risky decisions and learn from those. I think that clearly the wish that we all have to get things perfect, to consider every interdependency, every adverse consequence, but actually can sometimes cloud the decision making that needs to happen. So I'd very much welcome, as we review our own governance, the executive role in ensuring rapid decision making. In terms of international comparators, I would be bold and say this is a blueprint for a product lifecycle model organisation. It's distinct in the sense that we have basic science sitting here at South Moons. We've rejoiced in that this morning. We have an innovative approach to regulation in terms of methodology, and we have real world data. And the ability to make the most of those assets, I think actually, not ever wishing to be complacent or even arrogant, puts us in a space on our own. Absolutely, we're thinking about benchmarking as we move towards more recognition, potentially, of other decisions. We need to be absolutely sure of the provenance and the, if you like, the efficiency, effectiveness of the decisions that others make, but very much open, particularly through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, to pick areas like the innovation space where we truly benchmark against others. So something to come back to at a future board, I would have thought.
Okay, Mandy.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Very encouraging to understand the learning, and I think recognise how far we've come. And I think also now comparing ourselves against others and being able to, I think, collaborate effectively, being able to understand the decisions we take, whether they're working with other agencies who have done the lion's share of some of those decisions.
I think it's really important that we understand where we want to collaborate, but also where we actually want to have our deep domain expertise, to be able to offer something different, to developers around the world, frankly. So it's been able to know exactly what our strengths are and where we want to develop them further. Okay, Graham, I think you had a question.
Yeah, first of all, just to acknowledge again the tremendous amount that has been delivered, and I think it's really very impressive. A clarification and then a specific question. So if I understand it, then things that haven't been delivered at this point are all going to be rolled forward, or is there anything that's been decided is no longer a priority that's going to drop out?
So So that process is still happening. We are looking at each of these as we're building the business plan to see what needs to carry on and what is no longer relevant. So to the new corporate plan.
So still a work in progress.
It is.
So on the specific one, it sort of touches on a point that Michael made, I think, but there was one that is in red. So it says identify flexibilities introduced in COVID, which are safe to embed by the end of Q2. And I'm just curious as to why that hasn't been delivered. That feels like something that would probably be part of conversations and talks to this idea of resilience. So is there a background to that?
So do we maybe want to go to Laura and then maybe Alison, thinking about what we did in COVID and how we can apply that? But why would those areas still be red? Laura, would you like to kick us off on that?
Yeah, I think Glenn's team is leading on the sort of the policy aspect of it, but I think some of them, it's just sort of a reassurance. It's not that they're not happening. We haven't formalized them happening, if you see what I mean. With a lot of them, we haven't stopped doing it yet. So it's still carrying on. It's more, I think, that embedding the flexibility is about the decision to carry on and make it formal or to stop doing it. So I don't think we have rolled back. If we think about things like rolling reviews, for example, that's a way of working. So I think it's probably how we've that is just, if that's any reassuring, I think these things are carrying on, and there are a couple of my area. That's one, and another around labelling and what we actually require from companies. So I don't think we've rolled back on those. I think it's just we haven't formally said this is what we're carrying on with.
You see, one of the red items, for example, is embedding the operation of the new risk proportionate established medicines pathways, and we'll come on to that in the performance section. But the reality is we've got to get to the point where we can address the backlogs and improve that. So that probably is rightly red, to be fair. Whereas I think the essence of your question is are we doing enough on our sort of other areas? Graham?
And it may just be that it's an area that's hard to say when you finish because it's a continual process, and it may be tied into legislation, I guess, as well, in terms of where you lock things in.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you then say that you've done this, or whether you just say it's an ongoing process within the organisation, which I guess it probably should be.
June, you want to come in?
Yes, I think you've identified where it needs to be captured and, if you like, codified or brought together. We've done quite a bit ground up. Because this spans diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, there's an immense breadth of flexibilities that we need to dust off and decide whether they need to be part of regulatory reform embodied in current working practice, and then clearly reframed as preparedness and readiness for the future. So there will be a certain amount in the corporate plan, and we've actually had some really good work. We might revisit it when we talk about the in vitro diagnostics that actually helps us move forward and change. So it's an important issue that we keep live.
But also a number of the areas that are identified as red are things to do with our legislation programme, and that's not all in our gift. And Glenn, I don't know whether you just want to make a comment in terms of how we're driving forward the legislation programme to be able to deliver on these, not necessarily within this timescale, but within the new timescales.
Yeah, the work continues every day. To be honest with you, it's a bit of an active space and dynamic space to work in. So there are the major ones we want to move forward, and we're at the point of trying to target this year. There are headwinds in the system that we can't really control, particularly around parliamentary time. Exactly. A lot of legislation going through across government at this moment in time. So all we can do is get our programme to the point where we can lay SIs and where we can go through the process. But at the moment, those targets move a little out of our control, but we're keeping the pressure on internally. And teams across the agency from all the groups are involved in legislation, actually. So there's a lot of effort continuously inside the agency on this.
Yeah, and certainly thinking about the pressure within the Department of Health, there was a number of reasons that things like the public response to the clinical trials legislation took a lot longer than we would ideally have liked. But that was a government decision, that wasn't an MHRA decision. So I think we need to be quite clear that many of the areas that are red were not in our control. And so I think the important thing is that they are completed and that we're doing what we can to ensure that they're seen through. Does that work, Graham?
Yeah, I agree. I think that point, it was almost all those red items are external. So I think that the one I mentioned was the exception, which was,
But okay. So I think what we're asked to do today is, I think we've been reflecting on what the agency has achieved, over the last 2 years of this delivery plan. And I think the formal proposal is that we close this delivery plan and that we pick up the remaining actions to take a conscious decision of how and when they fit into the business plan or the new corporate plan. Because I think the new corporate plan should be seen as a continuation as opposed to a completely different direction. And that's certainly always been the intent. So on that basis, can I just check that board is content to close the delivery plan with thanks? Yeah, and a huge thanks. And I think we should record in the minutes, actually. You know, there's been a massive, massive team effort by hundreds and hundreds of people across the agency who've enabled this work to happen. It's never easy doing that during organisational change, but I think I'm really, really impressed at actually how much has been achieved through a very difficult and turbulent 2-year period. But I think we're on the right track now, and that gives me a lot of confidence. So we just record our thanks to our staff. That would be great. Thank you. So that moves us on to the next item then, which is on page number 24. And that's just bringing us up to the current day. And what are the most important activities and priorities from the Chief Executive's point of view? So June, you can assume we've read the report, but are there any key points you'd like to highlight for the board's attention?
Well, thank you, Stephen. And I think in due recognition of where we're having the meeting today, it's quite important that we reflect as a key message the importance of the science base that we're so privileged to have here. It's as we found this morning in our discussions with colleagues, to be part of an organisation that has such groundbreaking and world-leading science gives us an immense starting point as we look particularly to the use of the Chancellor's 10 million that we're looking today to prioritise to ensure that innovation truly, smoothly and in a streamlined way reaches patients and the public. And then in order to do that, for these innovative advances to reach people and healthcare, we need pathways, regulatory pathways, and to recognise the leadership coming forward from our teams, particularly biologicals, the personalised immunotherapy, for example, a great step forward potentially. We want to see it safely delivered. In the device space, we've already touched on the fact that we're looking to transition to a new regulatory framework, and that too will include an innovative devices access pathway. To back all that up, a strong surveillance system, and thankfully we've been seeing more activity by manufacturers to make sure that we get data in good time, the strengthened devices surveillance, and an interim devices working group. So in telling that kind of story, I hope the board gets a cohesive feel rather than a set of interesting activities. And safety, as we know, continues throughout the life cycle. The board will wish to note that the isotretinoin report of the Commission on Human Medicines was published. We've already touched on partnerships, how important that is, and the work ongoing with Australia, Canada, Singapore and Switzerland to ensure that we can use that forum to consider better how products reach patients and the health service in a streamlined way. So here we have, I think, something that speaks to the excellence in science, the work to expedite access, strengthen our surveillance systems, and of course, all of it's thanks to our staff. So an overview rather than highlighting anything in particular, perhaps as we finish and we speak to excellence, the prize that was won, I think, for the University of London Best MSc. I think we should celebrate achievements like that, that someone who has been working on new approaches to influenza A vaccines actually is singled out as having done stellar work. So time to celebrate.
Yeah, a lot to be proud of. I think that's excellent, June. Thank you very much. So, okay, colleagues, who would like to ask June any specific questions? Paul, come to you first.
And it's a great report because we see sort of the seeds which have been sown over the last couple of years starting to blossom and can see the progress we'll make in the future. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, which are quite different. And the first one is around CPRD and Sprint, which is fantastic that we're able to accelerate clinical trial recruitment because this is one of the major areas we can be competitive on, and it's a problem at the moment. So really enthusiastic about it, but only half of the GP surgeries signed up to it, and then CPRD only covers 30% or less of the country. So it's a bit of a postcode lottery if you're not happen to be part of one of those enthusiastic GP surgeries. So is there a way in which we can make it fairer and broader in scope
Okay, let's pick that question. June, do you want to come to you first and then maybe come to Alison if that's
Yes,
okay?
thank you. It's such an important enabler as we look to the new clinical trials legislation that we all want to see rapid recruitment and having the ability to reach into the general practice community for research ready people who may well, as we know from COVID, be only too happy to help. But you put your finger on something that we do need to really, if you like, put the engines under. Going back to a year, it was just a twinkle in the eye, I think, whereas now it's actually a really important offer. Using the opportunity of the work that we're going to do under the clinical trials legislation, I hope we'll promote its availability and to that extent improve uptake and the speed of uptake by researchers. I'm sure Alison would like to add.
Alison.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it is a very interesting point. So as you know, and it's in the report today, CPRD currently covers just over 27% of the UK population. I would note that it is representative, both in demographics of patient populations, but also in geography. So it does have a wide spread. However, it is still 27%, and there is an ambition to continue to grow that as our technology base improves with CPRD. We've got a number of technology projects ongoing, which will enable in the future the expansion of that database. I think, you know, we need to acknowledge that the model relies on the collaboration that CPRD builds with its GPs, and it's that model which enables this sort of sprint and recruitment process to work because of that sort of trusted relationship. Obviously, GPs are under huge pressure. So I think that's one of the reasons for potentially less engagement than we would have hoped for. And maybe as the NHS works through some of its current challenges, that might improve. But yes, it's about increasing the scope as our technology platform improves of the CPRD database. I think it would be hard to move outside of our current structures because we rely on that trusted relationship. So it's about growing CPRD to better encompass the UK population.
I'm also just thinking through the use of the NHS app is a clear priority for NHS England in particular, and actually part of that is also linking to gain sort of consent to share data. And I just wonder whether there is other opportunities like that we could maybe build on. But I don't know whether that was what part of your thinking, Paul.
Exactly that. Whether there are other mechanisms that we could use to say, look, this is a great sort of pilot that we're doing with Sprint, but there's a big gap which is missing, and are there different approaches that we might take?
It's something that we're looking at very hard with the yellow card system as well, in terms of better engagement there. And it's having the yellow card prominent, and maybe some of the proactive vigilance approaches that we're looking there would potentially in the future use the NHS app. Certainly if you look at your NHS app, there is a button to click for research opportunities. So it is an idea that I will explore actually. It's something that I need to look at.
There's a strong strategic desire to get 90% plus of the population onto the NHS app. Now we're nowhere near that at the moment. I can say in Sussex it's 50%, but you know that's definitely one of the vehicles from a digital perspective, and actually sort of then be able to consent for data sharing for appropriate clinical use or appropriate health research, I think is an interesting avenue to explore.
Yeah, it's sort of a right to be informed about a trial for which I may be eligible. So UK life science has become more competitive, and it's fairer for patients.
Yeah. So, but I think you had two questions, Paul.
Yeah, the other one, performance metrics on the website is great. I think that's really helpful. From a company perspective, it's the planning. So you want to know sort of how long things are going to take and where you are in the queue. In fact, for anybody, there's a psychology of queuing and knowing. Just having that sort of regular information. So if we know where an application is in process, there'll be a whole series of steps, and presumably we can track that. Can we proactively communicate that to the company so there's not just a big black hole and they find out 2 years later?
Well, one of the hopes of the regulatory management systems is to be more self-service. But Laura, would that provide a vehicle to provide that type of information?
I think it would, but I think we're doing some of that now. First, I would say that the stuff that we publish now on the website is not what we've come up with as we want to publish. It has been done in collaboration with the industry about what they're interested in seeing. I think the other thing is the work that we've been doing with the customer service centre to make sure that the customer service centre can provide more specific responses to when a company is asking where things are, so that they know what the timeframes are going to be. And the third sort of approach that we're taking on this is certainly Julian Beach, our Deputy Director in that area, has been meeting with a number of companies who have large number of applications with us to review the position on that, and not only the timelines that they have with their current applications, but also reviewing anything that they have with us. It's in our queue that they may not be interested in anymore, and some of those have been pulled out. So it isn't just we are actually doing some of that already, and I think RMS will make it even easier in terms of the self-service for people to be able to see where they are in the queue.
Yeah, Paul, does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. It's rather than having the aggregate data, it's wanting to know me as an individual, where am I in that process?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that level of engagement is helpful context, so thank you for that. Colleagues, any other questions? Mercy, I'll come to you, and then to Mandy.
I just want to ask June about the Access Consortium, because it looks like this is a really great way of kind of raising our kind of global profile, but also working with other regulators in that way. And you've got a summit coming up as well. So all that potential, how are you seeing it kind of work out? And when is our time up, as it were, for being kind of the chair? Because it's kind of soon, isn't it? And but it feels that we're now kind of pushing things, and things are really developing. And I was just wondering how that's going to then pan out if we're not chairing, and what happens next.
June?
Super. Well, this is really of the moment. A lot of groundwork's been done in the context of the strategy for access, which is on the website, you can see, which actually has a lot of read across to our own planning, particularly for innovation, for widening the scope of our new active substance work, which was the bedrock work sharing and has delivered really well, but actually looking more at a promise pathway, and then looking at the end-to-end, looking at what Canada does for health technology assessment. So a reasonable proportion of products come through with both a regulatory approval and an HTA approval. So your question really goes to, what are we going to deliver in 6 months? It's not a long enough period, but it's that engagement on priorities. And just to show that this is very much in everyone's mind, all the countries' minds, is that we've actually been talking about extending the chair periods, not of the UK specifically, but as we put forward some proposals about strengthening the infrastructure. If we want to see this operate as the third pillar after the FDA and EMA, it has to be operationalized in a very, thorough manner. And our comms strategy, which has been presented, clearly the front door needs to have a very wide awareness amongst industry. That has been very much welcomed. So I hope to come back to, well, perhaps in through one of these reports, as an end of 6 months, what have we achieved? But more important, as Mercy says, what's going to happen now? And with various changes at the TGA, a new head in Canada, a very experienced and positive head in Singapore, and the Swiss very much focused on AI and technology. This is a consortium that builds on the richness of the individuals. So I think, and I hope I'm coming across as very optimistic, because we all are.
I had a related question to that actually as well, because I welcome an extension of 6 months, because 6 months doesn't feel a very long time for an international consortium, to be honest, to be chair, because every 2.5 years you get your chance. I suppose my question would be, who's chairing it next, and what are we doing to talk to them in advance to try and have a continuation of our agenda?
This is where the changeover, and I look to Glenn with Australia. I think we go back round to Australia. Am I correct? I think so. A new head's being appointed. So this is very much the target of our current approach. We've always had a very strong relationship with Australia, particularly on surveillance and on medical devices. So I would see that this is going to be pretty seamless. The International Coalition, which is the more umbrella organisation for information sharing, meets in Melbourne in the autumn, and a bilateral in the margins of that meeting will be really important to strengthen that transition. So I'm, again, optimistic that that will be achieved.
Because I think a proactive transition to the next chair or that consortium, to my mind, has a lot of sense. It's still be the responsibility of that country to then chair it in their own way, but to make sure that we've given them a really clear steer of what we would like to see as part of that process. But Glenn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to say that the transfer of chairship isn't passive, entirely passive, but we're now learning from IMDRF and other things we're involved in how they do it, so that we can actually put in place a bit more structure for when we hand it over.
Yeah.
That there isn't a secretariat as such for access, but there is a collaborating coordinators group, which are very keen to increase their role in that kind of handover activity to make sure there's a corporate knowledge, I guess, created as you go through the chair. I think June's absolutely right that we can be positive about it. There's an acceptance, I think, across the group about the comms and the need to raise the profile and how to work together. I'd also add that it's more than just the consortium. So the work on recognition that we're doing around starting with our partners in access, and we're learning an enormous amount, and they give us a lot of time. They want to learn from us and us from them. So it's more than just the process of approval that go through access. It's actually the community it's creating and the ability for us to understand our comparable regulators around the world. So I'm really enthused by it. The team enjoy working on it as well.
Good. I think that's really helpful. Thank you. That's excellent, actually. Thank you, Mercy, for that. Mandy, I think you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. Mine was around clinical trials and the work on legislation, and just thinking about the reports in the media around the UK isn't doing as many clinical trials as we had done, and not as many as we hope to do. So how do our regulations compare with other countries, say somewhere like Spain, who do seem to be increasing? And how much is regulation making the difference around whether companies come to the UK to do their trials? Because the regulation is an important part of that, but it's not the whole story. And just understanding what impact we will have by getting our regulations right.
Okay. June, do you want to pick that up? And maybe Mark might want to make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly the history is of European regulation. So when we compare ourselves with Spain, it's the other factors in the ecosystem, if we can call it that, for research that have a part to play. And as we look to pick up our own opportunity with clinical trials, we really want to maximise that, if you like, differentiator while maintaining a compatibility. We have inherited, for example, the work of the G7, a charter that says, let's think about those international trials, master protocols, the kind of things that will ease a developer's gathering of adequate data for decision-making purposes and authorization. It's the biggest opportunity we've had in this space for many years and will have for coming years. So I think that what Glenn will probably, Mark will probably talk about is the fact that we're now engaging with stakeholders to make sure that we do this in a very inclusive way and get the value of stripping out from the law and putting into flexible guidance as much as possible. So that's the big opportunity. Some of the aspects will come out in Lord O'Shaughnessy's review, which I guess will come out in the next couple of weeks. So we're a very active area, and again, very much worthy, and would very welcome some championing from our non-executives. As a lot of work's been done, but it's not too late to actually question things, as has happened in the process so far. But I'm sure Mark might want to say
Mark,
more.
in terms of making the UK competitive as far as clinical trials is concerned?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to emphasise what June's just said. Lord O'Shaughnessy has been approaching a whole system review, and the MHRA is part of that system. And I'm expecting that his recommendations will include the MHRA, but not solely focus on us. Now, what we can do is absolutely the legislation change. We've been operating under very similar to EU legislation to date, but it's time to make that change. We have done the public consultation, which is mentioned in the CEO's report, and there was a very strong request from all participants that we have a level of comparability with Europe, so that we are not basically putting a barrier in place there, but also that we're working fully internationally on it. So we'll be walking a bit of a line there of making effectively UK unique, working with the ecosystem partners where we can to really try and make those improvements. and bringing it forward as rapidly as possible, because what the current media is showing is that the situation is changing and that people do want to see the fast responses. Our strategy, and which has been supported by the public consultation, is to have a legislation core and put technical details which are subject to change over time more into guidance. And that hopes to give us more agility. And I also echo what June said, support from the NEDs on drafting that guidance will be key. We'll be setting up a wider consultation system. We used during the public consultation a committee of experts to help shape our thinking. We'll be bringing back that committee of experts. We'll need to do it wider. We will need subgroups to focus on particular aspects of the guidance and legislation. So it's quite a large program work that we're starting now. And we'll be happy to describe it, but we're looking for help from the public, from experts, from wherever to make this as good as possible.
Okay, and just to be clear, Mark, we've actively contributed to the Lord O'Shaughnessy's review.
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Okay, Mandy,
Yeah, I think it's a very important aspect, and also making sure that we can't solve this whole problem because of the other factors, and I think that's important. But really encouraged to see looking at both the international as well as the European, because I think global companies are looking for global clinical trials.
And I'd just encourage you, Mark, as and when you're very clear about what non-executive director support you want, please just email us, because I think between us, I'm sure we'll be able to help you. So, Glenn.
Just additional comment to say, it's not just about legislation. Every group in the agency is engaged somehow with the system on clinical trials, whether it be through CPRD, whether it's through licensing, Mark's group, mine. It's a collective effort. And actually, the way we're building legislation, guidance heavy and legislatively light, you'll see from last week's publication of smarter regulation from the government is entirely in line with that. And I think to say somewhat slightly ahead, perhaps because we're already on that path.
Yeah, I remember having that discussion very early on about, what can we put into guidance, what can we put into legislation. So I think, we don't need to legislate on everything, but we need to have really clear, flexible guidance, and that can evolve more quickly than legislation can. So that's the benefit. Okay, so colleagues, Michael, one final question, if it's a quick one.
Just to be a bit cynical, if you look at, and I appreciate this is a snapshot, but if you read Health Service Alignment, paragraph 3.4, it says, the National Partnership Team is progressing efforts to promote system alignment. We're supporting working groups. It's all a bit vague. And, I could be a cynic and say it's civil service language as to say, is anything really happening in this space? And my question is, and it builds on clinical trials, which is very specific. On this one, are we absolutely clear in our own minds what our value proposition is, why people should collaborate with us? Because they won't unless we're clear about that. And I just wonder, we talk very much about how we will work with the system. Industry tell us that they want to see MHRA, NHS system all working together because of the added value. It's just a bit vague, Chair, and I just wondered if you wanted to say a bit more about it.
June, do you want to help to clarify?
I recognise that as it went in. But I think it's a good challenge, and it's really important that we have tangible goals. When the report by Valence Now, Dame Angela McLean comes out, it will talk about the data sharing, for example, the things that need fixing before things can be optimised. And I see these groups, which Glenn has instigated, as the starting point for making everyone realise what needs to be done. And mainly what holds up these kind of arrangements that you've talked about is that common view of what needs to be done. And until you get that, and data sharing is an absolutely prime example, then you have stasis. And this is why I hope, and we'll pass the challenge if you like, Stephen, to Glenn, that each of these groups identifies the connection, the value to each participant, what needs to be fixed, and gets it done.
Okay. So when are we going to see some output from these groups then, Glenn? I suppose that's the ultimate question Michael's really asking.
I enter these things with deep cynicism as well. It's not easy to articulate the coming together. I think the first thing to point out that the desire to bring everybody together is actually the result of the pressure on us. And if you like a response to say it's not just us, but I'm happy to convene across the UK. Out of the partnerships we do, we are the only UK-wide body in the room. And so our first job is to say you all need to work with us and us with you. So let's meet. Every of these things, setting them up and agreeing in terms of references is fun. But we've gone past that particular stage now. The 4 working groups, 2 on horizon scanning, meds and devices, 1 on information sharing, which we'll come back to, and 1 on patient pathway architecture. That is a particularly vague title, but I'll come back to that as well. On the horizon scanning, that's kind of what it says on the tin. And what are we doing as a system for a level of system intelligence to let us know what's coming 10 years away, 2 years away, 6 months away, and how do we work together to improve that exchange of knowledge and information? That one's particularly key. So an output is that we've now actually agreed what information and how we will share it with NICE and the other HTA bodies. There's work from those groups picked up on previous work from Tori Crawford in partnerships. So that's an early win for us and something we can point at and say, we are doing this. It's now working with Laura's team and Claire's team on how we put that in RMS. So the outputs are already beginning to come. Horizon scanning, we now have access to horizon scanning reports we didn't see before from the NHS. So we're aware of what they're looking at and where does that fit with our pipeline knowledge. I'm not saying it's all fixed. There's a lot of work to be done. And we haven't even brought in the academic sector, research and innovation funders or industry yet. But those are the plans in the future.
Okay.
Chair, I'm very assured by that. And you to continue the theme of cynicism, once you put your head above the parapet and you begin to show what is possible, there is a risk if you don't manage that effectively that you become the reason why it doesn't happen. And that's the biggest fear I have. I think you're doing some brilliant things, but we need to manage that process very carefully in quite a cynical way, to be truthful.
No, I think it's a helpful challenge, actually, to be fair. But I did want to just bring Catherine into the conversation because, Catherine, obviously you see this from the Department of Health's perspective. Is there anything else that you think the MHRA could do that it's not doing in terms of trying to align its services with other parts of the health ecosystem?
Sorry. I think it's been a really positive step to see MHRA engaging with all the different parts of the health system. It's not easy. There are so many bodies. It's complex, particularly across the 4 nations. I think the challenge we've got is to persuade the partners outside of the health system of the intentions of this work and the good intentions behind it, so that we get all the participation, because it's not something that MHRA can do by itself. It's not something that the health bodies can do by themselves. So I think that's the next step, and we look to support our ALBs.
And this is where I think the department can actually support us, to be fair, in to help us with that wider communication, because obviously individually we can all talk to individual stakeholders, but it actually comes back to what's the overall narrative, and it is about UK health ecosystem working together, and we need to have some demonstrable outputs from that. And that's where Michael was coming from. So, but thank you for that. Graham, I'm keen to move on, but is it a really quick point?
Make it quick. It was just to follow up on that horizon scanning point, because I think that feels really critical, and great to hear that. Just briefly to understand how we're feeding that into the current discussions internally, particularly around science strategy and forward plan. So just briefly, what is the process for dissemination internally?
A little bit organic, a little bit purposeful. So there's the horizon scanning groups have the agency members of horizon scanning activities on them. So we're fully aware of this conversation. I think I'm happy to pick it up outside the meeting, because some of the things we're talking about the NHS need to come to the agency as well, and they're not public documents. So I think that's how the next stage will be done, the more purposeful stage, where we actually take an issue, bring it into the agency and bring it to the executive, and then work through how we deal with them.
Okay, and June, final word?
We've defined actionable horizon scanning. This isn't just fun journal reading. And I think it's time that we all put those actionable horizon items together in a much more visible way. Because once you've agreed what they are, like cancer vaccines, you get to grips with what's needed. Okay, great. Thank you. We could carry on this conversation for some time, but I think at this moment I need to just draw it to a close. But thank you, June, for your report. We're asked to note the current priorities on page number 32, so thank you for that. But also thank you in particular for all the members of staff across the agency who do great work every day. So thank you very much to each and every one of you for everything that you do. Let's move on. And one of the other outputs that I think is important for the board to review is our operational performance. So if we just move to page number 33, please. We've got a report here
about what was the operational performance of the MHRA for the year up to the 31st of March 2023, largely on Q4. There's a lot more information in this, and that's a deliberate decision. So again, very specific thanks to Rose and for your team in collating across the agency a much bigger report, which is exactly what the board's asked for. So thank you for that. We should be careful what we wish for. But you can assume we've read the report, but are there any key points you want to raise? Then we'll go into discussion.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, we have added some more details and in particular, more information about R&D, research and development, and metrics on grant proposals, and also more on cybersecurity, because it is obviously such a key issue. And because we've now done a third version of this, we do have some more trend data in there, which I think is really valuable. We need to do more of that going forwards. And there's certainly plenty of improvements we're planning for next year. So we recognise we need more comparatives, for instance, and we're looking at new measures to show and track our queues and timelines as well for next year. So we want to continually improve this reporting process, but happy to take, probably all of us to take questions on some of these measures.
Exactly. Can I maybe just suggest, just so we don't keep dotting around the place, that we go through each of the sections in turn, just to, I'll just ask each at each section if there's any particular questions. So the first section largely is around patients, public partners and customers. So there's 2 or 3 slides there in terms of that particular section. Were there any specific questions on that? No? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so then the next section, which I'm sure there will be questions on, is around science, research and innovation. So this is where it starts with clinical trials, including all the timescales, and then also, as Rose said, about the other aspects of the SRI group. Paul.
Yes, it's on the clinical trials, and it's just how one reconciles, and I think there is a way that the number of clinical trial applications has dropped significantly, but the time for us processing them has increased. And if there are fewer with the same number of people, then you would expect you'd be processing them more quickly. So is that just an FTE issue? And is that, do the numbers work out?
Okay, so Mark, maybe come to you in this area, please.
One of the interesting features is that the number of applications, the initial applications and amendments, have not dropped significantly over the past quarter because we've been meeting it. So there are a number of issues going on here, but the perception of a sudden drop-off is we're not seeing the evidence of that.
So just to be clear then, Mark, if I can, we've got a graph, which is actually showing 178 to 132 to 89 in 3 quarters of clinical trial volumes. How is that not a drop?
Well, it's this is what we're just seeing is that in terms of the work coming to the agency, as I said, the initials and amendments are holding steady. The total trials probably lost into that area. So yes, there are issues here, but it comes down to the metrics. What we're seeing as a team is still very high workload. And the issues that we're dealing with here is roundabout staffing. So we have had various departures and sick leaves. We are bringing staff in. We have got now back full complement and we're clearing the workload. But there is that wider issue of the whole ecosystem that we mentioned earlier and trying to bolster that with how we process it so we get to the faster turnaround of time.
Does that, Paul, does that answer the question?
I'm not sure. So if we're doing half as many applications, does that, and it's taken the same amount of time, does that mean we've lost half of the staff? I mean, if that's not the case,
very crudely, yes.
Okay, so it's a major drop in FTEs.
Yes,
okay.
Which we have been addressing.
Okay, and well, I think we're also looking at bringing in extra resource from within the agency to support this area.
Yes.
And obviously we can see the graph that shows that the timescales have gone from 30 days to up to 90 days. When are we, again, I know we've made some public commitments, when are we expecting that to come back down to the more normal 30 days?
We're working hard to meet public commitment of 1st of September.
Okay, so so the next quarterly report, we should expect to see a reduction.
Yes, that is what we're hoping. If not, there'll be a very clear explanation why we didn't. But yes, we are hoping for that reduction.
Okay, and June, this is an area of real focus for the executive committee.
Absolutely. We look at, you know, what needs to be done from moving staff, which is obviously the first concern, training and other resources like secondments. We've been looking to NIHR, for example.
Okay.
But this is really the top priority at the moment.
Okay. I think there's some extra context there. It helps, Paul, but thank you for that. Mercy.
It's slightly a follow-on, which is about kind of scientific publications and things. Obviously, it's a great incentive for people who work here, that they're able to do scientific research and also publish. But obviously, there's been a drop. Is it linked to the same issue of staffing?
Yes, it's linked there. It's linked more to transformation. So transformation effectively moved people around, changed groups, did some refocusing. Research, as you know, is an incremental process. You think of, so when you shake it up, you will see a drop. So we've seen a drop in publications. We know historically from the agency that that drop has occurred whenever there's been significant move, but we're quite hopeful. As you saw in the CEO's report, there are a number of activities coming through now, which should stimulate and lead to scientific publications. Also, we're seeing a slight uptick now in grants received, which is funding. So yes, the numbers have dropped, but we're hoping we can mitigate it to bring it back up a level, because as you said, publications are very important for us to achieve our public health impact.
Yeah, it's not just about the volume though, is it? It's also about the quality of the journals that we're submitting into.
Absolutely. One of the problems with the metric is that it shows numbers, but not necessarily quality.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of make that point as well, because it's actually getting underneath these figures to see, are we in good peer-reviewed journals and things are really important too. And also a point that was kind of raised, to even get grants, you need to do some, you know, you need initial data sets and things to actually attract the grant funding, to then go on to do it. So it's all kind of you know, we need to think about the whole scientific kind of, and I guess we could pick that up in the science strategy as well, couldn't we?
Yes, we do very much want to address it in the science strategy.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, if we move on then to healthcare quality and access, there's a number of you know, very detailed slides here, really transparent. So Laura, I think thank you for your team for being you know, open about that. Can I just check if there are any specific questions for Laura? Yeah, Graham.
And I think this builds on some of the conversation we've just been having. Again, really acknowledging the transparency, and I think that it's useful to see these numbers. I had to check the y-axis because it does say 600 days, but it's transparent. And I guess there is a lot of other information now on the website, which is helpful. And I think this is just a subset that we might be able to link to from here. Yeah. I suppose my question is, I think Rose touched on this when you started. So I guess what I was looking for was the current weights, and what we know for things that are going into application now, be it a new proposal or amendment, whatever it is, what are the weights and what do they look like? And then we can track those. And did I understand that will be something that we've presented? It feels like it would be something that would be really good to see in the next reports. And is that in plan?
I think it is that kind of forecast, because at the moment we're probably we're not helping ourselves, because when you clear older ones, you then look like your timelines have gone up. And that is why there is one point in here which I've commented on, which is almost to say, don't get too excited about this because I'm not yet. But the fact that the time to first RFI has gone down this month. That again, the
RFI request for information.
The request for further information. So what that is telling you is the speed at which ones that are coming in now that we're getting to the first inquiry is quicker, and that should then start to track through to how long things are taking. But if you also look on these graphs, you'll see some of the variances are enormous, and therefore that's why, you know, it looks lovely, but 1 month is not, you know, one swallow doesn't make a summer or whatever it is.
Completely understood. And I suppose what I was hoping to see perhaps was just a chart with a month, 2 months, 3 months, and how much has been waiting, and you could get a sense of
and I think that's what those sorts of wait times, this A&E, how long you might wait, is really where I would like to get to. But the focus at the moment is very much about tracking. We're doing a lot of work on visualization of our management information, clearer targeting, so that we can really start to get these backlogs down and then focus on those sorts of things.
And I think recognizing the work that's going on, there's clearly a lot of work going on from the exec and everyone in the organization, which is great. And I think it talks to Paul's point a little bit about that expectation management, and also showing the progress externally, which I think would be reassuring to people when they're looking to come to the UK or do things in the UK.
Yeah. And similarly, as I asked Mark, you know, we've made a public commitment of when we're going to bring the timescales down. Would you just like to remind the board
we
what
have?
they are?
So it is about July for variations, but those are the variations in HQ&A.
Yeah.
So the variations that you've got in here are broader than that. They include safety variations, and we're looking, and in our normal, but in our corporate plan as well, to by the end of the calendar year to be dealing with national initials in the timely manner. I would say that the 600 days, again, we are being as transparent as we possibly can. That's the end-to-end time. That's not, and it doesn't relate to it's not the same as our 210 statutory timeline, which is that awful phrase, clock on time. That's a useful guide, and it's our legal framework. But actually what we're really interested in from a perspective of customers and patients is how long it takes from end to end. And that involves the action that the company takes as well.
Yeah, we might need to do some more communication around that, because I think people, you know, in the industry are used to the 210 days of the clock on, clock off. As it happens, I completely agree with you. It is total time to patient that matters.
Yeah.
But a big chunk of that is outside of our control. It's down to how long the applicant takes to respond to the request for information. And if they take a long time, that adds to the time. So there's a nuance there around the communication to be really clear about it's time to patient, isn't it, effectively?
Yes, yeah.
I think I had a question on this as well, if that's okay. You've already mentioned the large variation, and I think that's an issue that, you know, that will definitely help if we can reduce that variation over time. But I'm still sort of struggling to understand why it's taking around about 100 to 200 days to do a reliance procedure. And I just wondered, you know, Laura, if you can just explain a little bit more about why it would take so long to do reliance procedure.
We haven't, I mean, now we've got reliance procedures. We've moved a lot of that work away from assessors.
Right.
So we are moving that work, particularly, so there are different types of reliance.
There are.
The first thing to say. There is the reliance where we can simply accept the assessment, and that is the thing that is going at the end of the year. And then there is also reliance where it's, I wouldn't say it was reliance, it's more recognition. So it is about when one or more member state in the EU have approved something, but we do then have a look at that, because it's not the same as the centralized procedures. It's not gone through the same, you know, we're not in the same space of it. So there is work that is, some reliance work has gone on those sorts of applications, and that is a lot of the work that happens in the established medicine side, which is where we tend to see those through. And we do that on a risk stratified basis. And that's not necessarily, I would emphasize, about whether we trust a particular member state or not. Sometimes it's actually about their healthcare systems and all of that, which plays into what standards they might apply. So there's that happens in established medicines. We still need to make sure that the quality is right.
Yeah.
If there is, for example, a different factory involved, that means, you know, you still have to do an awful lot of work on those sorts of things. The other side of things is going back historically. I think some of the things that we did do with the centralized procedures is we did look more closely at them, particularly with the COVID procedures. That is really now stopped, and taking some of that away. The other thing I would, while I've got the mic and talking about reliance, I did want to say something about the fact that it's been commented at previous boards that a lot of our new active substances are coming through reliance procedures, and is that a concern? I think it is. My skis has just frozen, so I haven't got the numbers in front of me. We do have a really healthy pipeline in new active substance where the majority of them are national applications. Right. So really, really keen. We were seeing through COVID companies switching to reliance because everybody was trying to get everything through, and we had our own pressures. But I think if we could actually retain that pipeline and keep that pipeline natural, we have a really bright future ahead of us on that.
Okay, no, I think that's really helpful, and again, it just strikes me there's a communication issue here in terms of managing expectations. That feels that's quite important. So so I think if we can manage expectations, because I think when people hear the word reliance, I think people have got different interpretations of what that means, and you'd think it's almost instantaneous, and it's not. And I think managing expectations becomes really quite important with our paying customers. Okay. So if there's no further questions on that, thank you for that, Laura. That's very helpful. The next section was on safety and surveillance. Again, some really detailed information here, Alison. Thank you for being so transparent about that. That's really helpful. But Hader, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Stephen. Two questions, if I may, around CPRD. The first one was I'd be interested to know what we're doing about. It's great to see this number going up. We blew our target away. That's absolutely fabulous news. What are we doing to increase linkages to other data sets, like acute data sets, to truly give that kind of a full, complete picture? And also, how are we thinking about quality and monitoring the quality of data as it comes in?
Okay, Alison?
So linkages, there's a number of standard linkages that CPRD provide, and then there are linkages that we can do on an ad hoc basis when a particular client or company or wants a particular linkage, but those are done on more ad hoc basis because they're more intensive if they're unique linkages. So they constantly review the linkages that we provide as standard and looking at those. So that's a constant iteration. But there are a number of sort of more standard ones that people request, and those are the ones that are more generally used. Your second question was around quality, and there has been some quality issues recently around the EMIS data that come in that there was a change to the EMIS structure, which, for example, put vaccinations in different boxes, which then didn't come through. CPRD actually noted this drop-off in quality, and it has required us to take off a couple of the refreshes in order that clients really did have confirmation and clarity around the quality of the data. The team are working hard to make sure that quality and the information with the EMIS and the EMIS system is back up to speed, and we hope to release a new refresh of the data in the next couple of months. So I think that CPRD constantly look at quality, and I think that's one of the markers of the system, in that it isn't you just get what's given to you, it is that's checked. I think there's nearly 1,000 quality checks that are done every time a refresh is released. But we have had a recent problem, and we're working hard to correct that. And hopefully in the next couple of months, assuming that all of the checks are complete, then the new refresh will be released.
Okay.
Thanks, Alison. It's great to hear we're proactively monitoring that and providing a good service.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving on to the people section. We've got, again, a nice range of extra work here. And again, Mark, thank you for the extra health and safety data that's been provided in this as well. That was a request for the board, so thank you for doing that. Again, I thought that was very clear, actually. So, and it's really good to see the turnover of staff coming down to more normal levels. But Hader, do you have a question?
Just really good to see the turnover rate come down. Just on the vacancy rate, I think just from the numbers we were provided, I calculated that to be around 17%. I'm not sure if that's accurate. And if that is, that's still quite high. And the question is really, what are we doing to try and get this under 10%, which I think is a industry standard kind of reasonable rate. And how long will this take,
Okay.
if that's not too open a question?
Maybe come to Rose around that one.
Thank you. Yes. So during the last year, we focused very much on the critical vacancies that we've had across the agency, and been very successful in recruiting finally, which is great. And now this year, we are extending that to replace the contingent labour and the fixed term contracts that we have in place to cover a lot of these roles. So we are pushing ahead with our recruitment to try and get those levels down so we can reduce our reliance, particularly on contingent labour.
Yeah. Okay. And the timescales for that, just to Heida's point?
So it would be during this financial year.
During this financial year. So, but I must admit, we've got some fantastic staff within the agency, but also some of the new recruits we've recruited. I've met some really excellent people. So I think actually the quality of the recruitment and people joining the agency has also been at a high level from what I've observed. So, but thank you for the question. Okay, that being the case, finally, finance and then digital. Money's in control, and Claire and her team are keeping us safe. That was what I read from the report. Is that a fair assessment? Okay. Anything you want to add, Rose?
Yeah, I'd just say that I think there was a final push during the last quarter to use our funding. And so although we have landed with a surplus, it is actually a far better position at the year end than we anticipated at the last board meeting. So yeah. I would flag that.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that. That's helpful. Okay. So I think we're asked to note this report. It's for assurance, but again, thank you for just taking the time to work our way through that. Can I just again say thank you to the executive team for the transparency of the data. I think this is probably, frankly, the best performance report I've seen in my 8 years on the board. So I think that's a real step forward. We can always ask for more data, but I think it's understanding the context that is really, really important there. So thank you for that. So if we can note the report with thanks. So we've now got a couple of assurance reports, which I'd like to go through relatively briefly because I think they're fairly self-explanatory. But the first one is the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee, one of our 3 assurance committees. Mandy Calvert, you're the chair of the committee. Thank you for the report. It's very clear, but any key points you want to bring to the board's attention?
I think this was quite a pivotal meeting in many ways, because I think what we're seeing the clarification of the governance, which is really important, and the role of ODRC. And I think the contribution from the senior team into the meeting and really understanding some of the quite tricky issues we've been looking at in terms of recruitment, staff motivation, the impact of the transformation. We had some very good discussion. So I think what we're seeing is, with the vacancies being filled, a bit of a turning point in how the agency is performing. And I think we're seeing that from the previous report on performance as well. I think there's some key messages around communication in the corporate plan, for providing that sort of key targets for everybody, and how that then filters down to help people clarify and move into their roles. And that, I think, is very important. So we're also seeing the transformation team getting up to speed, which is doing some really good work in supporting leaders throughout the organisation. So I think quite a turning point. Still quite a long way to go, but I think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and we've decided for the next meeting to involve the One Agency Leadership Group. So that's looking at the next level down, and hopefully that again will help. To some extent, the Assurance Committee is leading by example too. But happy to take questions.
Excellent. Well, I think that was very, very helpful perspective in addition to a very detailed assurance report. So. Colleagues, are we assured from this particular report? What I heard was we're at a turning point. There's some good green shoots. There's more to do. Is that summary fair?
I think that's much more succinct.
But again, I think engaging our staff is really important. So again, this morning, engaging with staff here at South Mims was an important part of that. And I think we need to keep doing this. Really glad to see you talking to the One Agency Leadership Group, because actually, we're all leaders in this organisation. It's not just the board or the executive committee. We've all got to get involved. So, okay, so on that basis, I think we'll note Mandy's report with thanks. And on a similar basis, the next assurance report is from the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee. And Michael Whitehouse, you're the chair of the committee. You can assume we've read the report, but any key points you want to bring to our attention?
Just 3 points on health and safety, which is really, really important. There's more to do. Mark has referred to that. It's moving in the right direction, but we will continue to monitor. On the financial statements, we are obviously now moving towards final agreement by the board on the 11th of July. What we did at ARAC was very much support the executive in trying to de-risk the process as best as we can. And I'll ask Rose in a minute just to update where we are on that. And my final point is really around the internal governance. And I would agree with Mandy, I think we're at a turning point. This year, internal audit are likely to give a limited assurance around financial control and governance. That needs to be put in context. I think what they see is considerable number of green shoots. Things are beginning to improve. Governance is becoming stronger, and I think risk management is much better. And we had a discussion about that at the last board in committee. So I think it's moving forward. The challenge to the agency now is a year from now, we need to have gone beyond limited. We need to have got the level back up to where we want it. But I'm confident, talking to June, Carly and Rose, that is the intention of the executive. And we really want to move into that space. So that's it, really.
And just before I come to Rose, just for the benefit of the members of the public that are watching, there's 4 levels of assurance. You just want to remind the public what they are?
That's a really interesting one. Very unusual.
Substantial?
Yeah, substantial, moderate. Most people are in the moderate space. It's very unusual for somebody to be in substantial. I mean, you've got to literally walk on water. So limited is the next one down. We're not in the bottom category as far as I can recall, Rose. We're in the next one down. So this, it's not a disaster, but there are certainly areas where we need to improve.
So we're not inadequate, but we're not substantial either. So I think that's the point. But Rose, just in terms of follow-up to that, and Michael specifically mentioned the annual report and accounts, how are we doing in terms of being on track to approve those on the 11th of July?
So at the moment we are on timetable. We've delivered the draft set of accounts to the auditors and they have started the final audit with us. There are some tweaks we want to make to the accounts, but we are on track to deliver to the July board.
Okay, that's great. Okay, Carly, can I maybe just ask you as our Director of Governance, is there anything else that you want to add in terms of the process that we're going through?
I don't think so. It's very, very helpful to have ARAC there to kind of test and challenge us, and likewise with ODRC. I think it's good to hear that people are recognising the green shoots. I was getting feedback from staff just this morning that governance pathways are becoming clearer, and we just need to continue to push that through the organisation. I suppose a frustration is that you can't fix some of these things overnight. It does take time to work through and work right across the organisation. But I think we're certainly on that pathway now, and the work that we're doing for the annual report as part of the governance statement will set out all of that work that has been done across the piece this year.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. Sash, can I just ask you to bring James into the meeting, please? Thank you. Any other questions for Michael specifically? I just had one, Michael, just in terms of the remaining internal audits. When do you expect to get those completed?
They're supposed to be completed for the July meeting, so that they need to have done that to have sufficient evidence to form their opinion. I have no reason to believe that they won't be completed.
Okay, and just ask Rose again for your assurance that they will be completed by the 11th of July, the remaining internal audit reports.
That's not necessarily within my gift, as they're outsourced. The work is outsourced, but certainly we'll do everything from our side to ensure that we turn around reports so that our external internal audit can can finish their element of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's an important piece of just completing the cycle there. And obviously there is a sort of a management response required in these, and so some of it is in our control, to be fair. And obviously the internal auditors will use that as their sort of a route of assurance, won't they? Okay. So if colleagues are content, then I suggest that we accept your report with thanks, Michael. And again, please keep up good work. And if there are any changes to those timescales, then please let us know informally as soon as possible. That'd be great. And that takes us on to the next item, which is around the area of compliance and what are the strategic priorities for a progressive MHRA compliance strategy to enable new product innovation. And I'm certainly hoping that at some point that James Pound, our Deputy Director for, sorry, James, I've lost your job title, Deputy Director for Standards and Compliance. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. But Laura, you're the Chief Officer responsible for this area. Any particular points of introduction to the paper that's been put on?
Yes, thank you. Hopefully we can unfreeze.
Yeah, it does look like James is frozen on the screen.
As well, that will be helpful. I mean, as we say in the opening of the paper, this is a delivery from our delivery plan, which we were talking about earlier. So there's a nice circle here. I'm delighted to bring this to the board for approval. By way of a prelim, I just want to say the standards that we set for inspections and the rigor with which we carry them out are recognised and respected across the world. And it's a vital part of the work that the agency does to protect patients. And I really wanted to say that up front, to be clear that this strategy is not about diluting what we do in that space. It's about how we target it in the most effective way to achieve the outcome which we want, which is good compliance with standards. It recognises that compliance is a behaviour resulting from a combination of things, motivation, skills, knowledge and resources. And there are therefore different causes of non-compliance. So what we're trying to do with this strategy is recognise that and seek to use that understanding informed by data to intervene in the right way. We can't do this alone because we are part of a global system, but nor is this completely alien to the way the world is already thinking about compliance in terms of the sorts of things that the International Council for Harmonisation, for example, are looking at. So I think with that introduction and an unfrozen James, I will pass over to him if that's okay.
Okay, good morning, James. You can assume we've read the report, but obviously we want to give you the opportunity if there's any key points you want to bring to the board's attention.
Thank you very much, Chair, and apologies if my camera froze slightly at the beginning of the call then. Just to build on Laura's point, I think some of the key elements to really put out is this strategy is really focused on how we maximise benefit to patients.
Yeah.
And that's through two dimensions. The one dimension, which is very much around how we ensure patient safety across the product life cycle, from clinical trials through to products that are being manufactured and distributed to patients, millions of patients in the UK. And that's very much by how we improve the use of our data and intelligence models as we see the evolution of larger data sets and integration of data from across the system to focus our resources in a risk proportionate way to ensure patient safety. The other dimension is how that work also acts to enable innovation in medical products and accelerate the access to patients to those. That's by firstly ensuring we provide advice upstream to enable those developing new trials, design or new manufacturing processes and new products to understand how they're compliant, but also more widely across the supply chain, providing that support and advice upstream for those who wish to be compliant and can benefit through some of the improved guidance the agency can provide. At the core of this, I would like to just pull out pillar 4 of the strategy, which is very much around how we incentivize good compliance and we ensure compliance by design. This is an outcomes-based approach. This is something that we want to pilot in the first year of this strategy, and that building out over the 3 years of our new corporate plan by 25-26 to have an outcomes-based model for regulation and compliance across the product lifecycle. Building on Laura's point around the international and domestic dimensions, this is something that fellow UK regulators are considering in many regulated sectors, not just medicines, but also something that's being very widely discussed internationally by both those in the industry, but also peer regulators globally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, James. And I think actually the board has had the opportunity to have an earlier discussion on an earlier draft of this. You know, and I'm really pleased to see a really strong focus on the use of technology, real strong focus around partnerships, and actually always with the focus on the patient as the end benefit. So I think that's really nicely summarised. Thank you for that. Colleagues, can I just check if there are any immediate questions that this report raises? Wow, stunned silence. No, there's a first. Come on, colleagues, there must be something. Mandy.
I really welcome this approach, and I think it's bringing in new technology, thinking about how we use data, but also taking people through the life cycle. So one of the questions I had was just thinking about, have you thought about how people can game the system, particularly with more data available and where that comes from, but also perhaps use of more remote inspections, those sort of things. And counterfeit and everything else is such a big issue, both in our industry, but fake everything in the world as well.
Okay, James, would you like to pick that one up?
Sure. So I think it is really important when you're developing a new regulatory model to consider all the different elements and factors that can feed into providing a robust evaluation of compliance. So I think this very much looks at the existing data we have, but how you can take data from others to provide an even more enhanced understanding of that. So certainly I think that mitigates against that risk. One other element that we'll be considering as part of that pilot is the role of unannounced or short notice inspections, for example. So something that would underpin a different regulatory regime, but would mean that all of those organisations that are subject to our regulatory oversight would be inspection ready at any moment for the regulator to turn up to want to understand the work they're doing and ensure that it's protecting patients.
Good. Okay, thank you. I had a question, James. I'm just wondering again in terms of how have we compared what we're doing here in the area of medicines in particular, you know, with other industries. So, you know, in terms of international best practice, because we're not the only type of regulator. You know, it might be foods, it might be chemicals, it could be you know, everything from aviation. So how have we taken other learnings from other industries into account in the development of this strategy?
So thank you, Chair. So we have considered that element, and for example, in the coming weeks, I'll be attending a workshop with the Food Standards Agency, so another highly regulated sector that is of great interest to the patient, to the public, and that'll be discussing the different approaches different sector regulators are taking. Many regulators are looking at these similar approaches, whether you call it outcomes-based cooperative regulation or similar name. It's very much looking around how do we make best use of the resources we have, how do we make best use of the data intelligence, how do we make best use of the technology, and that allied with how we are working to ensure innovation is being undertaken in safe ways. So there are certainly domestic conversations happening both within the healthcare space with colleagues in the Care Quality Commission and the Human Tissue Authority, as well as similar sector regulators like Food Standards Agency, and we'll certainly be reaching out to other sectors like Civil Aviation Authority who have adopted similar principles, and they have a performance-based approach to some of the regulation they undertake, and I'm sure there'll be learnings we can take from those organisations, but also internationally looking at some of the programmes that some of our peer regulators are undertaking, not only in medicine, but potentially other areas too.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And maybe a question, June, for you. I'm just thinking in terms of thinking of the entire regulatory pathway. You know, where does compliance fit in from your perspective in terms of its importance?
It really is, if you like, one of the pillars, because it's throughout.
Yeah.
And we've got to look from the earliest stage in a clinical trial right down to how a pharmacovigilance system operates optimally if we're going to really grip the standards that we set and the ability to comply. And I'm really welcoming how this looks at those motivational incentives. If I can shift to something else slightly through you, Chair, is who do you think are our optimal partners? You know, there's a lot of partnering we can do, but do you see, if you like, a Premier League where we can actually work with like-minded strategic thinkers who are in this space of amazing science coming through, the point of care manufacture we've already delivered on as a first. Who would you see would be, if you like, people we'd want to, you know, really drive this close mark with?
James?
So I think we've developed a strategy with a systems thinking approach, and I think for compliance, that's going to be important here. How we work as a system to drive that improved compliance, protect patients, and enable innovation across the life cycle. So I think there are partners who are in regulators and similar regulated spaces, without perhaps naming all of them specifically. I think those who operate in a similar space to us, and where there is shared intelligence and knowledge that we can use to inform our respective risk-based inspection programs. But there is also the partnership we can make with the innovation ecosystem. So, for example, in the UK, we have a really well-established innovation ecosystem, whether it's in the trial space, and you have organisations such as MHRA, but also if we look at the work of Innovate UK in the advanced manufacturing space, how we can partner some of those earlier and upstream back to inform our understanding of those new technologies, those new medicines, and how we have to assure that our regulatory system has the correct level of readiness so that those technologies and approaches can be adopted in a timely manner when it comes to the point of translating it through to accelerated treatments for patients. So I think there are partners in the innovation sector, which includes academia. There are partners in our domestic regulatory network. And I think there will always be some of those key major international partners of fellow medicines regulators who we'd want to work with, because in many cases there are shared challenges across the kind of global space of compliance, but also a lot of the technology and the data and intelligence we can share could better inform each of our inspection programs.
Yeah. Yeah, you may not have seen the earlier sort of conversation, James, but we were asking a question earlier about got this partnership working. How do we know it's actually delivering anything? So so from your perspective, I understand the need for organisations to work together more closely as a system, but how will we know that that system is delivering patient benefit?
Absolutely. So I think there'll be a number of measures that will be built into this compliance strategy to demonstrate the effectiveness and outcome of it. I think some of those relate to where we can partner together to demonstrate the sharing of information and that having an outcome on the improved compliance in the system. So I think that compliance measure is a system measure that we'd want to work with partners in the UK, Department of Health, NHS, devolved administrations to understand and improve the level of compliance in the system. But also, if we think about the international collaboration aspect, there is the international recognition framework that the agency is working on, and actually our existing programme and framework of mutual recognition agreements and the opportunity to use alliance. And in part, that improves all of the inspection programs for global partners participating in such programs, because it enables us to use our limited resource in the most cost-effective way to ensure patient safety. So partnering with global regulators. So, for example, MHRA has a mutual recognition agreement with our peers at the United States Food and Drug Administration, and that benefits both patients in the United Kingdom and the United States by collaborating in our inspection oversight of manufacturers of medicinal products.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And I think, Alison, you wanted to come in and make a point.
I just thought if there was time, yes. I was just interested, James, thinking we had a conversation earlier about COVID flexibilities, and in the context of that, the remote inspections, and really just to understand where you think the direction of travel is in terms of the prediction of future split, and really your confidence that that is truly equivalent to an on-site inspection. And you talk about a number of sort of new technologies and tools that will enable that, but just interested in your thoughts of where you see that going, and really where does that sit internationally as well?
So thank you, Alison. So on the use of technology to enable inspections, that's the key component of the strategy. And I think we've all witnessed the incredible innovation by regulators during the pandemic to maintain regulatory oversight. And that's involved the use of different digital technologies through platforms such as Teams or Zoom, as well as the use of remote visual technology. There was an ICMRA, so ICMRA, the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, reflection paper published by a coalition of regulators who were using these technologies. And I think that acknowledges there's a lot of benefits to having this in our toolbox, in our armory, as a tool we can deploy in a risk proportionate fashion I think we have to acknowledge that technology is going to mature over time, and I think that will create further opportunities to make better use of this technology. So I certainly don't think the achievements of the pandemic are the end of the use of these technologies. I think we continue to build on them, work with technology providers where those solutions are appropriate, and then we evolve that model over time. I think there will always be components that are going to require potentially on-site inspections. I think that's an important part of our toolkit, but it's not the only part of our toolkit. And as Laura said before, there'll be other interventions we'll deploy, many of them upstream, to prevent non-compliance happening in the first place.
Yeah, that's great. Got a couple more questions, but is this a related point, Laura? And then I've got a couple over there. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, Claire, and then I'll come to Glenn.
And Alison made one or two of my points. We obviously spend too much time together, but so just to add, I think so obviously James holds the pen on this with Laura, but not alone, there's that collaboration within the organisation as well. So for example, RMS was mentioned earlier. So we're thinking, how does this align with compliance strategy? How does that feed into it and so on? But then also with some of the, not necessarily through vehicles as projects, but just looking at technology in general for the organisation. So some of the work that I and my team are doing, again, looking at the needs of our partners here, of the chief officers and teams, and what we provide from that respect. And then finally, just with the data strategy as well. So linkages each way.
There's a number of linkages, aren't there?
Yes, and that's probably one of the reasons why other chief officers didn't have too many questions, because we've looked at the compliance strategy a lot, and it's starting to be embedded within our work as well.
That's really helpful. And Glenn, you had a point?
Just to support how this can help us actually be again ahead of the curve slightly. There's the conversation across government and beyond that talks about not engaging early because we over-regulate. I think this is the pillar 2, the upstream intervention, where you can actually educate, not over-regulate at early points, is really, really crucial in life sciences, and something which we should be really positive about, support James and I believe, because it's something which shows how you actually do this well and why you do it. And in the end, I would expect a metric would be some reduction in time to market access because of that. So that's a really positive thing.
Okay, thank you. I just had one other sort of small question, and I'll maybe ask Laura then just to sum up if that's okay. And that was just in terms of the longevity of this strategy when it comes to more personalised medicines, increasing use of point of care manufacturing. So does this strategy allow us to take into account those sort of technological improvements, James?
Absolutely, it does. And point of care is a really good example of the excellent work the agency has done to create that pathway from horizon scanning through to some regulatory science and then regulatory readiness. So the agency published its consultation outcome on point of care manufacture last year, and that'll be moving through implementation. And what's key in that is there's a number of features where we will be changing the regulation to make sure that it enables that nascent sector to develop. But also importantly, and this ties into Glenn's point on the upstream information and guidance, is there'll be a lot of guidance developed by the agency to better steer and enable those who are seeking to develop those products how to comply. And that's going to be really important for that sector, because it will be a very different type of manufacture than the traditional scale-up system that we have at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, well, no, that's helpful. So, Laura, any final points you'd like to just draw to the board's attention before we ask the board for approval?
This has been an incredibly helpful session, and also to congratulate James and the team for the work that's been done on this, because it is absolutely transformed in the sort of 18 months I've seen it evolve. So thank you for that. I think one of the huge challenges is around it, but it's not our challenge alone. It's in all the spheres of compliance when everybody is trying to move to prevention, is measurement, and what we were talking about earlier in terms of what data we might bring to the board. It's so easy and so tempting to measure numbers of inspections and numbers of things that we find wrong. There is an argument that if you find something wrong in an inspector, that's an indication of a compliance failure. If everything's perfect, either you're not looking hard enough or the system's working and it's not there to see. So I think there's an intellectual challenge, but it's a shared challenge in compliance to think about the measures. But I don't think, because it's difficult to measure, we shouldn't do it. It still feels like the gut feel the right way to go. So we will continue to work on that. And I think that's somewhere where we talked about partnerships. There are some where we will learn about the barriers, and that's probably the innovation and the advice, which is going to be helpful. But I think also the partnership with other regulators on how we tackle such challenges of measuring prevention are something that's going to be ongoing over the next few years as we implement this.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that context. And again, it's sort of a big thank you to James and your team for the work that's done on this. Now, as far as the board's concerned, we're asked to endorse this strategic direction for the agency's future approach to medicines compliance. So can I ask if the board's content to approve this? I think approving it enthusiastically, James. You might not be able to see us all, but I'm seeing lots of nodding heads here. So, okay, and June?
I would just say you maybe need to think of renaming it because it's so much more. It really is an enabling strategy rather than simply checking, which flows from Laura's point.
Yeah.
Have a think, because this is the way to enable innovation. The reason we had the COVID vaccines was because all the work was done on manufacture of mRNA well ahead of anything else. So it is an enabling function, as Glenn has said.
Yeah, it's something very proactive, actually.
Very
so, okay. Well, with that one small suggestion, if you just think about the name of it. But James, thank you again to you and your team. Really appreciate that. The board is content to approve this strategy, and good luck with its implementation. So thanks for your time today, and see you soon. Okay, colleagues, we're now going to move on to the corporate plan. This is a subject that's very near and dear to our hearts, as we've discussed it every month since October, one way and another, different elements of its development phase. I just need to make everyone aware that the corporate plan has just been going through legal clearance, and so was not able to be given to the members of the public observing today's meeting until this morning. So we do apologise for that. The corporate plan itself will not go into the public domain until it's been submitted to the Department of Health. And the decision we want to make today is to submit it to the Department of Health for overall clearance, and then it will go into the public domain more widely. So we've been quite structured in terms of the way we're approaching this. So apologies for that, but certainly from a board perspective, we've had many sites of different variations on this. Rose, you can assume we've read this version. But are there any key points you want to bring to our attention before we ask for any final questions or comments?
Thank you. Yes, so since you saw this at the last board meeting, we've fed in your comments and we've undertaken an overall review of the plan's overall tone and narrative to ensure that it's balanced and includes feedback from our stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at the key actions in each of the years, just please bear in mind that they've been put into the years where we expect completion. So work for the majority of the actions shown in later years will actually start or has already started in order to complete them in that final period. So if you're seeing things later than you expect, it's not that we're going to do nothing in the first 2 years. We will start that work. It's just we need to put it in the year where we expect completion. And of course, the detail of all the activities and everything underlying it will be in the business plan with the SMART objectives of what we need to achieve to deliver this corporate plan. So the detail will be in the business plan.
Yeah, and I think just following on from our conversation about the delivery plan, I think there's been a conscious effort to reduce the number of objectives that we're considering. And I think actually the point you've just made around wanting to start that work early, so we're clear on the end point, but the work needs to be done in plenty of time, which again was another key learning, I think, from the delivery plan. So I think that does feel completely appropriate to my perspective. So colleagues, we've got the latest draft. So again, the purpose of today is to approve this for submission to the Department of Health and Social Care for final clearance. So, we're not in a position to approve this on our own, but it's our decision to submit it to the Department of Health. So, any specific questions, comments, or final observations? Graham.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great to see it. And I was pleased to see the work around transparency, building from the sort of publication of signals through to this piloting of public hearings, which I think sounds like a really positive step forward. I'm just curious as to whether we have hearings in mind already based on what's happening, or is this something that will be developed in terms of priorities going forward to be delivered within 4 or 5 or before 4.5, as Rose was
Okay.
saying. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah. So Alison, would that be partly in your area?
I think it would often be in my area, and I don't think we have identified the topics yet because it was to delivery, the first pilot them in year 2. What we want to be doing over the next year is really thinking carefully about the process, setting up how we will invite people, thinking about the topic, the stakeholder engagement, the forum, that sort of thing, online, hybrid, what should that look like? So that will be over the first year, and then it would be launching in year 2. And I think obviously we want them to be topical. We want them to be projects that we're working on that are relevant to that time. So I have to imagine they would emerge over the next year largely.
And we've already had some examples already, haven't we? With Commissioner Human Medicines was had one public session on one particular product, and similarly we've had quite a number of significant stakeholder events on certainly another couple of areas. So this is not completely new for us. This will build on what we've already done, I think.
Yes, absolutely. We've had 2 open CHM meetings. We've had quite extensive public engagement, particularly on isotretinoin, where we did a public consultation. So maybe that's what we want to work through. Would it be a consultation followed by a public hearing, or would it be either or? We just need to really think through what would be the most effective model to enable patients to engage in particular major topics.
And actually, interestingly, I should know the answer to this, but have we actually asked the patients how the experience was from them?
So I'd actually maybe refer to Rachel on the feedback, but certainly on the consultation, we had 650 plus responses. So that would indicate that it was a good process. We, in particular on that particular issue, we had feedback that we needed to extend the time because it crossed over the Christmas period. So we extended the time to allow people to engage. And we also allowed people to come and offered people the opportunity to give individual testimonies if they felt able to do so. So that was kind of a trailing of the public kind of but this would be a bigger
I appreciate
event
that.
to that. Yes. So we've had a number of lessons learned and we need to reflect back on them and then develop the best model.
Yeah, and Rachel, we'll continue to look for feedback from patients. We have a patient consultative group which we can involve in this as well, I'm assuming.
Yes, absolutely. And I think as Alison's highlighted, the move towards public hearings very much builds on the work we've done to date, is a good next step forward. So we'll be working together on developing the model and obviously consulting Patient Safety and Engagement Committee as that develops as well.
Yeah, I think that feels very reassuring, Graham.
No, I agree. I think it's very positive.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on the corporate plan? I probably wasn't wanting to open it up for wordsmithing every final full stop, but we've already done that several times. But okay, so I'm not looking to create problems where there aren't any. I think a lot of work has gone into this to be really clear about having 4 really clear priorities, which to my mind, I think are really self-explanatory. But starting with maintaining public trust through transparency and proactive communications. And then enabling healthcare access to safe and effective medical products. That's the core of the work that we do. Delivering our scientific and regulatory excellence through strategic partnerships. So a real recognition we can't do this on our own. A willingness to work in both the UK and the international space on this. And be an agency where people flourish alongside a responsive customer culture. And actually the transparency of performance data is an important enabler of that. So that feels like 4 really strong strategic objectives. Each of those have then got their 3 specific strategic goals for each of the 3 years of the plan. So that's giving us a very nice framework. And then Rose, what will build on this is there will then be an annual business plan that we'll actually get into the detail on an individual year with more specific actions than just these. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And finally, June, as Chief Executive of the MHRA, anything else you want to do to commend this report to the board?
Well, I fully commend it. I think, as we've heard earlier in this discussion, it has come from really intense engagement, not just internally, but externally too. The pillars that you've described, Stephen, are really robust. It's sufficiently stretching and sufficiently, I believe, specific, so that as we move into the year 1 business plan, we'll be able really to continue to drive and keep up the momentum.
Yeah.
So
great.
I commend it.
Okay, excellent. And I actually like the very last paragraph, which is about the realization of the strategic opportunity. We're at a pivotal moment in our evolution, and we have a unique opportunity to further our mission to protect and improve public health through our scientific expertise and the risk proportionate and agile regulation of medical products. So that feels like a really strong, well thought through, coherent strategy to me. Okay, board, so are we content to approve this for submission to the Department of Health? Catherine, it's over to you now. So no, I think the next stage of the process is clearly this needs to be consulted appropriately across the department, and certainly if you need further support in terms of any ministerial involvement that you want, then obviously we're happy to support our sponsor team as far as that's concerned. But is there anything else you think you need at the moment?
No, thank you in advance.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. That feels like a really important milestone in terms of closing down the delivery plan, looking at where we're currently at with our current performance, really interesting new work on the compliance strategy or whatever we end up calling it. And then, an ambitious and really well-grounded, corporate plan for the next 3 years. So thank you for all of your contributions to take us through each of those components. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the teams who've contributed to all of this work. We really do appreciate it. So that brings us to the final item on the agenda. It's always my favourite, really, which is what questions do members of the public have about the items on the board meeting agenda? So, Rachel, can I just ask you if we do have any questions that have been asked that are relevant to today's agenda?
Yes, thank you. So we've got 3 questions that are relevant to today's agenda, one of which was pre-submitted and 2 of which have been asked during the meeting.
Okay.
So if I start with the first one, which is, does the board consider the performance of the MHRA to be adequate in respect of transparency and openness?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe June, can I maybe start with you first?
It is a good question, thanks to the questioner, because really the important point is how seriously we take our performance in being open and transparent about everything we do. Because as we've just discussed in the context of the corporate plan, it's the bedrock of that public trust. I'd secondly say that we've made great strides when we think about even today, performance statistics regularly published every month. The fact that evidence on which we make decisions is made available after a new product comes through the decision-making process. And in terms of that decision-making, opening it up to patient involvement. So there's a real differentiation and a number of levels at which we believe transparency and openness are absolutely key to the safe use of the medical products we regulate. Having said all that, the substantial progress, there is a lot more to do. We are on a journey. We've talked in the last minutes about how in the corporate plan, first pillar, we're looking to build trust. We want to be able to do much more in terms of involving the public in hearings, for example. And I do think in terms of the evidence and the information that we hold, the interactive use of our vaccine safety data, all of which is geared to helping individuals' judgments of benefit and risks. So we see this as a really important area. There's more to do, and we're doing it with a purpose, which is ultimately those individual decisions on benefit risk that we believe that we want to support in the best way possible.
Okay. And maybe I could just bring Michael Whitehouse into the conversation, if I can, just on the subject of transparency, because Michael will be too modest to say, but with a long career with the National Audit Office and having seen many public organisations, and obviously now chairing our Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, to answer the question from a non-executive perspective, are we doing enough around this whole theme of transparency and openness, and is there more we can do?
Chair, I would say yes, we are a transparent organisation. All the documents that we produce are very clear about what we are seeking to achieve. I would note 2 things that I've seen improvement over my time at the board is much more focus on patients, which and the patient perspective is much more prominent in all of our discussions. And I think a commitment to measurement. None of this is easy, and I refer to the discussion that we just had on the compliance strategy, where Laura has said how important measurement is. We're made a lot of progress, but we've got more to do. But if you look at us internationally in comparison with other regulators, I think we are a transparent organisation, and as with any organisation, there is more to do. I think the one thing I'd say is it's the ability to focus on outcomes. We talk a lot about our delivery. I think transparency is also about outcomes for patients, outcomes for innovation. And I think, like most organisations in the public sector, we are challenged in that space. But I do note the commitment of the executive team to do more in that area.
Yeah, and it's really difficult measuring outcomes, to be fair. So, I think that's an important piece of context. But no, I think that was really helpful, Michael. So thank you for your contribution. Okay, Rachel, is there a second question?
Yes, so moving on to the second question, this relates to CPRD, which was discussed earlier. What are the barriers identified by the agency to CPRD recruitment, and how can participation by GPs be more UK-wide?
Okay. Well, I think we partly picked that up in the conversation, but maybe Alison, anything else you want to add to that?
I suppose one thing we can do, one thing I would add is that we are launching a new interventional research platform, and that's been talked about at board before, and then that will help increase the speed that a GP can recruit a patient and the experience of that GP in that recruitment process. The quicker it is, the easier it is, the more likely we are to facilitate that onboarding. So I think that that's a really important point, and we've been iterating and doing improvements in the background, but in the summer, late summer, we'll have a major rollout of an update to that platform. So I hope that will help. I think the other point I didn't mention earlier, and that the team would remind me, is that they have learned that boots on the ground is important. So we've been working with the Clinical Research Network to provide nurses to support practices with screening and inviting patients where that's a major part of the trial, because so that will help, I think, also in increasing the uptake and the recruitment process. And we are talking to the CRN National Primary Care Lead around how we could facilitate that more UK-wide. And I guess with the UK-wide point, it is a geographically represented UK-wide always, and it is our ambition to always increase that scale and scope of CPRD.
Okay, and maybe I'll just come to the person sitting next to you, actually, because Dr. Junaid Bajwa, apart from being very interested in the area of technology, you're also a practicing GP. So is there anything else that you think from a general practice perspective is a barrier to entry here for CPRD?
I think Alison's mentioned it, but we probably do have to be empathic around the demands on primary care as they stand at the moment. And I think we've discussed it in previous boards, but the opportunity to engage PCNs in England to think about how you could have a PCN engage as opposed to practice by practice, I think could be helpful. And with this additional resourcing that you were describing around engaging with CRNs and others, just making it really easy for practices to onboard, I think will be really important. So if we can be empathic, make it easy, and probably think about the PCN level engagement, I think we'll be onto a higher opportunity to engage more practices over time.
Yeah, and PCN is obviously primary care network, which is actually local groups of GPs, and I think certainly the way the integrated care boards are trying to deliver primary care at scale, it is largely through these primary care networks. So that feels like quite an important building block that will be highly relevant to what's important to the NHS, and also provide that extra scale, I think, as you mentioned. So thank you, Junaid. So that means we must have one last question.
Yeah, so the last question is about clinical trials, and it's how can the agency incentivise overseas and UK stakeholders to encourage UK clinical trials?
Okay, well, maybe I'll start with Mark, and then I might come to Graham in a moment. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So it's very important that we incentivise trials, and we very much recognise this. And there's a large number of things we're doing to address this. First of all, it's what we can do as an agency. We've discussed already in this meeting that there is a number of trials where we're slow. What we've been asked and what we're seeking to do is hit consistency, so that so that we give an answer in a certain time. And that has been one of the key demands from all partners. So it's hitting a consistent performance is vital.
Yeah.
Then it's clear communication of what we're after. We're actually going through a stage where we're looking to see how we improve processes, and what we're learning is that this can be done both just internally, but also through the applicants. So we're now busy putting out additional guidance onto the MHRA website. That guidance has to be understandable and clear. That's what we're working with testing, so that the message is going out very clearly what we can do. Then more widely, it's working with others. One of the things that we've mentioned is the O'Shaughnessy review, which will come with, we're expecting requests for to be delivered by the entire clinical trials ecosystem. And that's almost certainly going to be involving us looking at, say, maybe some of the administrative steps of putting in an application, where we're working with other regulators to get them what can be done there. Also understanding the quality of what we're putting out. So what is the level of advice? Is it competitive? We've talked about the changing to the clinical trials legislation, which is a significant opportunity to improve our productivity. There again, just to emphasize for the overseas point, the strong demand that we're not putting in something that would isolate the UK.
Yeah.
So looking very closely to make sure that it's comparable, whilst really emphasizing the benefits that the UK has. It has an extremely mature, extremely active clinical trials community. It has got a track record of really innovative trials, which we saw in COVID-19 and elsewhere, real expertise there, which we should be building on. And then looking internationally, we've also talked today about the Access Consortium, understanding where what we're doing there can be harmonized with them, and clinical trials changes that can be harmonized across the board. So to answer the question, there's a whole range of things we have to deliver, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And, Graham, obviously a sort of a professor for National Institute of Health Research, and all your own research that you conducted Imperial. Anything else that you think the agency needs to do to incentivize and encourage clinical trials?
I mean, I think Mark's given a pretty comprehensive answer there. So there's most things you've covered, and I think a lot of it, as you say, comes down to the predictability for companies in terms of when they can deliver their trials, and knowing that they can plan that with confidence. And I think everybody here recognises that. I think maybe the only other thing is that there is a potential for the agency to have areas of particular scientific expertise which are going to be of interest, where they align to the government strategy around particular areas of science. And I think we've seen investments elsewhere in the system that will hopefully be able to support new trials coming in. And I think the agency is obviously thinking about how it can work more closely with that. And then, as you say, a lot of that delivery is beyond our control, but we can certainly facilitate that and make sure we're engaged well with the other agencies who are trying to deliver that within the NHS system, and all the challenges that exist there at the moment, be it primary care or secondary care.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And June, is there anything else that you want to add?
It sounds, and it's right to stress the amount of work going on, but I think in the bedrock of this, we can simplify, we can help navigation of what is a complex system, take repetition and duplication out. The combined ways of working with the HRA really was a stride forward. If we can start to permeate, and then at the very front end, to offer the face-to-face dialogue around the kind of innovative designs that Mark's talked about, because that way we're offering something quite unique. I understand many regulators don't offer face-to-face or that kind of in-depth dialogue. So I think there are a number of levels: strategic, legislative, in terms of guidance and partnerships, but actually that individual bespoke interaction could be what is our USP, if that's the word.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for that. That concludes the questions, Rachel, doesn't it? So, okay, so well, thank you for that. And thank you to the questioners who raised some, three really interesting questions there. If there are any other questions that were raised that were not related to today's agenda, then we'll send a written response outside of the meeting to ensure that that is also completed. So that concludes the main session for the board today. I would like to thank in particular our staff in the agency who've contributed to the production of the papers, but also have supported the meeting and organised the meeting today as well. So thank you for that very much. And finally, before we do leave, I would just like to remind everyone that the purpose of the MHRA, as we've talked about all the way through the meeting, is to protect and improve public health. And we'll continue to do that by enabling scientific innovation, by accelerating patient access to new, safe and effective products, and to strengthen our patient safety and surveillance systems. So with that in mind, I'd like to close today's meeting. Thank you for your time and have a good day. Goodbye.